In this video, I'm going to show you how I built a personal AI assistant mobile app in just 1 hour without writing a single line of code. But wait, this isn't just another Cursor tutorial, because I'm going to show you the real way of how to use Cursor effectively and building production-ready mobile applications that people will actually use. This app integrates with an AI agent to handle your calendar meetings, emails, and your tasks. Fully functional with user authentication, database setup, and the best part is that I'll be sharing the source code with you guys for absolutely free. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. If you've been anywhere in the YouTube lately, your feed is probably flooded with videos about Cursor AI, V0, or the new kid on the block, Bolt.new. Everyone's claiming that you can build amazing applications with zero coding experience and that these tools will do everything for you. But here's the truth: while you don't need to be a coding wizard, you still need to understand how applications work and function fundamentally and the building blocks that make them up. And let me be real with you, even as an experienced Python developer, I still struggled with getting Cursor to do what I wanted without messing up different parts of the code. It's like having a super smart but slightly chaotic assistant. So I took on this challenge, even though I've got zero experience in front-end development or mobile application development, to build a complete production-ready mobile application from scratch. What you're about to see is the entire journey from idea to production-ready application, covering how to figure out what tech stack you need to use, the different components you need for your applications, and then finally putting it all together ready for deployment. But before I show you a demo, let's understand how these modern applications work and break down the architecture in a way that makes everything else click into place. So from a high-level overview, there are 3 components that make up applications. We have the front end, the back end, and then the database. So the front end is what we actually physically see, and this is how we interact with the application. The back end is where the main functionality of the application happens, and this is where all the services and different processes happen. In my case, this is where the AI assistant sits. And finally, we have the database for the user authentication and storage of the data. Right, so let's start with the front end and look at some of the components that make it up. So we have the UI components, and these are the screens and the different navigations. We have the buttons and the controls, the forms and the inputs. These are all under the UI components. Then we have state management. So we have to keep track of the user sessions, the application settings, the cache management, error handling, and then data syncing, making sure all the data is in sync. And then finally, we've got API integrations, and this is where NA10 connections happen. We set up the client for Supabase, and I'll get into that in a second. We have the authentication handlers and the data fetching from the backend or the database. Next, we have the backend, and this is usually like a fast API Python backend, or it could be a JavaScript backend. However, in my case, I managed to actually do all the functionality for the application just within NA10. And this is where I have my AI agent, which acts like the brain. It reads in the commands from the front end. It checks in the contacts from the database to do any emails or calendar bookings. And then it also manages and orchestrates all the different actions that need to happen. And these are different workflows where we have all the different integrations between the different applications, and we can perform the different tasks and bring back the response to the main agent. And then finally, we've got the database, and I use Supabase for this. So it's made up of 2 different components. We've got the security system. This is where we do the user authentication and keeping the data safe. And then we have the storage of the actual data. So it could be your username or password, the profile settings, and the back and forth messages that you have with the agent. So one thing I also have to mention is that for mobile applications in particular, you'd have to usually develop 2 different applications, one for iOS and one for Android, because each one has a different language. However, you can build the application using Expo, which allows us to build the application only once and be able to deploy it to both iOS and Android. Right, so let's see in action. I've got the application here. So on the left-hand side, we have a simulator of an iPhone. And then I've got my code on the right-hand side for the front end. So all we have to do is npx Expo start. Right, so now that we've run the server, we can go into the Expo application inside of our simulation. And this basically allows us to run the application. So inside of the Expo app, I've got my Annex application, and then it runs the code. Cool, so we have the login screen at the start, but however, I'm just going to do the sign up. Sign in. Cool, so the first time we sign in, we can't actually use the chat. We have to go to the settings to set the profile. So we're able to put in a name, a little bio, testing, and then we select our time zone. So this is similar to how the iPhone sort of UI is at the moment. So I'm going to use London for the time zone, save changes. Right, so that's successfully saved. And here we're also able to clear the chat history and log out. So now we're able to go to the chat screen and conversate with the agent. So let's just test it out first, make sure it's all connected. Amazing, you can see how fast that was as well. So let's try the voice feature. So we're able to just record in voice and give it the command. So you just click this button down here. Could you please tell me which meetings I have on for today? So you can see very fast. So the first thing that happens is we transcribe the audio and then we send it to text to the agent. And then it comes back with, we've got a scheduled meeting for today. So there's a Q&A with Leah Motley from 8 to 8:30. And yeah, let's do one more. Please could you edit the video to my tasks for today. Edit the video for my task for today. Cool. And then it comes back. Okay, I need to add the auto scroll to the bottom. So that's a feature I need to add. But yeah, as you can see, so that's been added. It's really cool. And this is just a very small MVP. Obviously, eventually you can add multiple different features. And if you'd like to get your hands on this app and chat with your own personal AI assistant, you can join the waiting list. It will be in the description below. And if enough people show interest, I'll deploy this into the App Store. So now we've seen it in action, let's go through the build process and see how we actually got to this stage. Right, so here I've got a step-by-step guide on how I've built the application using Claude and Cursor AI. Right, so we first have to plan the application and figure out which tech stack to use. And here I've got the exact prompts and conversation that I've had with Claude when I first came to do this application, because I had no prior experience about mobile application development and the different languages and tech stack that they use. So I went inside of Claude and told it exactly what I'm trying to build, going into all the different details of the application and how I want it to be. I told it to give me advice on how to do this, especially because my background is in Python and I have no knowledge about front-end development and mobile apps. So he came back with the different approaches and he told me 3 different ways that we can do this. And this is where he gave me like the different pros and cons between each of the approaches. So we have the React Native, which is what I ended up using. So after he's given me the different approaches and now I'm aware of the different languages and tools, I didn't just stop there. I went ahead and did some more research outside of Claude to understand about the different approaches and their pros and cons a bit better. Before making a decision. Once I figured out the approach that I was going to take, it was still not time to jump into Cursor just yet. We still needed to fine tune the architecture of the application. I also wanted to understand how to make the application secure and compliant with the best practices. And then we put everything together in a requirements file, so a technical document. And this document is what we will be using inside of Cursor to actually build out the application. So I asked the LLM to give me this file in Markdown format to make it better for Cursor to understand. So this wasn't actually the final version, this is just a draft. So let's go into the code and see the final one. So here we have the requirements file. Essentially, we've got the overview of what the app does. We also want to tell it the project structure because sometimes Cursor creates new files in the wrong places. So we give it the exact structure that we want. We tell it the different core features that we want to include. And one thing we have to understand is that these LLMs don't actually know all of the different libraries and the API code and how we call different applications. So we have to give it snippets of the code to make sure it does this properly. For example, here I'm using NA10's snippet to make a call to a workflow webhook, and I just pasted that in here. We also have the state management and given it some examples of what to do in there. And this was all generated by the LLM for this part. Then we have the top level essential functions that we want to include inside of the app. And we break down each of the screens and what it includes in each of the screens. The voice features. So we just want to give it all the different features and details, very concise, very specific about what we want to do with the app. And then finally, we want to give it snippets of the code that's actually relevant to our project. So here I've just got the links, but what I'd actually do is go into those links and copy the exact code that we want. For example, I actually just took a screenshot of the file structure that Expo uses. So inside of the Expo documentations, it tells you exactly how to structure your files because it needs to be in a certain way. So I just took a screenshot of the file structure and I actually added that to the console when we create the applications, which I'll get to in a second. Next, we have the environment setup. So we had to install and configure Expo. So we just run this one command, npx expo install, and then we create a new project. And that's a simple command again. And the next step is setting up the environment. So this is the environment that we use to test the application. You can have it on your phone, Android or iOS as a application. So you just download Expo Go using this scan this barcode and you're able to have the applications inside of your phone. Or you can do an iOS simulator where we just install Xcode and then install a simulator within Xcode. And that's what you saw in the demo earlier. And now you're basically ready to start developing. So I'm actually just going to do this myself as well, running through these steps. Right, so the first thing we have to do is create a new project. We just copy this command here into a new project. I've just opened it up inside of Cursor. So we create Expo app latest, proceed, yes. The name, just call it my app, that's fine. Right, so the project is now ready. So it populated it with everything. So we've got a example application inside of here. But what we want to actually do is reset the project. So first we have to cd into the new folder that we've created, which is called my app. And now we just have to run this command to reset the project to get rid of all of the boilerplate code that was inside. So at this point, we're ready to paste in the requirements file that we got from Claude. So we create a new file here in the root folder, call it requirements. And then we just paste in the code that we got from the LLM, where it gives it all the instructions that we want. So now we're finally at the stage of getting Cursor to build out the complete application for us. And what we want to do is keep it very simple at the start. We don't want to include all of the different features. So perhaps we can just start by the chat screen, and then we can paste in the different features as we go. What we have to do is click Command, Shift, and then I to bring up the Cursor console. And here we just have to reference the requirements file. So that's attached to at the top there, you can see is attached. So we just have to say, so this is all we have to do. Build me a mobile application using the requirements given. And then we click Submit, and it should just fire off and do its thing. So it does all the different imports, it does all the different pages. And of course, I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but essentially we're now in a much better position because we've defined all of the different components and the features. We've given Cursor exactly the different snippets of the code from the documentations for all the different applications that we use. And this should minimize the different errors that we get during the development. So let's look at how I've actually broken it down and taken it step by step to ensure that at each stage we have a working application before we move on to the next one. So the first thing I did, so step 3 was feature implementation. I started with a basic layout for the UI components, and then I did the NA10 integration with the backend. And once that was working, so we have a chat feature, we're able to talk with the agent via text. Then at that stage, I added the voice implementation. So I used DeepGram for the transcription. So similar to before, I went into the DeepGram documentation and copied the section that's relevant to implementing it in my application, pasted that in, and then I asked Cursor to implement the voice transcription feature using this code. So it's a very powerful way to get it to just focus on one thing at a time and giving it all the resources that it needs to accurately generate the code. Once we have the voice and the basic functionality completed, that's when I started to play about with the theme and to improve the look of the app. Then I added the navigation with a settings page and a chat page. So we have the different tabs at the bottom of the UI. And then finally, and the most complex part of the build was the authentication using Supabase and the data storage. However, since Supabase is very popular and there's a bunch of documentations that the model's already probably familiar with, I didn't need to copy and paste any of the documentations. However, there was still some errors and error handling that we had to do. But we just do that via, whenever there's an error, we just copy it and then add it to the Command L section. So instead of Command I, we do the Command L to bring up the sidebar. And then we just copy and paste the error, whatever error that we get, into there and just ask it to fix this. And 9 times out of 10, it does a good job of fixing the error. Right, so next we have the testing and deployment, either via the simulator, the iPhone simulator on the desktop, or we can download the Expo Go application and then play about with it on our phones. And a quick tip, whenever we're debugging or handling different errors, or want to, like, for example, include a new feature, but we don't want Cursor to mess with all the other code, we really want to make sure we only add context to the parts that really matter. So at the top here, we add the context and make sure we only click the files that are relevant. So I'm just going to actually create an error to explain this a bit better. Right, so we have an error here. All we have to do is add it to the chat. So it brings it up to the right hand side here. And for example, if this error happened in the layout file, we just want to make sure we have that at the top here included into the context. Sometimes we want to add the whole code base or multiple files to give it a bit more context, but most of the time we just want to make sure we only include files that are relevant to the error. And then all we have to do is just say fix this. And before we apply any changes, we really want to review the code and make sure it's not messing around with parts of the code that don't need to be touched. And there you have it, guys. I hope you found this helpful, and I'll be leaving links in the description below for the complete source code. And also, if you want to play around with the app and use it for yourself, you can join the waiting list down below. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.